It's actually, we've got some nice air to blow on here, so you can sit down, relax. Exactly. Good, so maybe we'll start now. Okay. Try again. There we go. Great. Okay. Good. Well, welcome, lovely people. Good to have you here. I know there are many distractions. Can you hear me in the back there? Okay, wonderful. So my name is Sandrine Dixon-DeCleve. I am the former president of the Club of Rome, now the honorary president, and also the chair of Earth for All, and the co-chair of an organization that's been set up with Kirsten and others in Brussels called the Systems Transformation Hub. And several of us are also working together on a very important project here in Brazil through an organization of a variety of different organizations called the Collaborative for System Climate Action. What I want to talk to you about today, though, and why we're here, is the importance of using digital innovation as a force for good. And I think really that's what we're going to try to describe to you, taking into consideration, obviously, the complexity of how we look at AI, how we look at the digital revolution in terms of its impact, both in terms of emissions from an energy perspective, but also in terms of the demands on water. What I want to do is open up with some really key examples of some of the incredible ways in which digital innovation can really transform our lives, can enable us to decarbonize, and can really start to put in place the frameworks that we need to optimize our systems so that we can actually reach the speed and the scale that we need to. Even while we take into consideration, as I said from the outset, some of those difficult questions that we have when we talk about digital infrastructure and those energy demands and water demands. So I'm going to start with Kirsten. Kirsten Dunlop, who is actually the CEO of Climate Kick, and I'm very proud to be actually on the advisory board of Kirsten's foundation, the Climate Kick Foundation, where we're really trying to unpack again the ways in which we can reach that speed and scale that's so necessary in the area of climate change through a variety of different innovations at different levels. And Kirsten's going to lead us through some of the incredible work that Climate Kick is doing, in particular in terms of urban innovation with regard to digitalization.
Thank you very much, Sandrine. So I'm putting on my microphone table. Thank you. So maybe I'm just going to tell a story about this because it's a particular live case, and it's one of the live cases that forms the context for this entire discussion here. Climate Kick, the KIC stands for Knowledge Innovation Community, is Europe's foremost climate innovation agency and community. We work in 60 countries. We originated in Europe as an initiative founded by the European Commission. And we're an independent foundation, as Sandrine rightly says, working on innovation, but in the design, the deployment, the implementation, and the investment in innovation to achieve systemic outcomes. And as a result of having initiated a process to do that, we introduce methodologies to do that at scale and at speed, as Sandrine described, across large-scale applications, so hundreds of cities and regions. We lead an initiative that the Commission launched in 2021, which involves 112 cities in Europe who have committed formally to decarbonize at the scale of the whole city. And we're talking cities like Madrid, Rome, Paris, Amsterdam, Skopje, Krakow. They are large cities, mid-tier and small cities. And this initiative has a deadline, and 2030 is the clear kind of destination point, designed to create the framing of a mission. Is specifically around the notion, not so much of the moon shot, but of an earth shot. And it's designed to pull through both public imagination on the possibility of leapfrogging to just, resilient, beautiful places of human settlements, the places of which Europeans are so proud to be part of, but it's also designed to demonstrate the business case and the political economy case of what it would take to have hundreds of cities begin to really pull through the kinds of market demand for sustainable solutions for healthy living, for the combination of decarbonization and adaptation resilience in the urban environment. In scope is the entire built environment, the transport system, the energy system, digital infrastructure, water, waste, food, and so on. And as these cities go about this, they are applying a very structured approach. They have to come up with their emissions baselines. They have to identify all of the aspects within the city perimeter that they need to decarbonize and to make more resilient. They need to generate publicly available plans for that. They need to generate investment plans for that. And they need to generate a show and a commitment to multi-level governance to make that actually possible. And what that means in real terms is that you have, for the first time, at a reasonable aggregate, this is 61 million people involved and 12% of Europe's population, you have comparable aggregate information for what cities need to decarbonize at speed and scale with the entire integral perimeter of what it means to live in human settlement. And it means when you start to translate that, for example, in terms of European industries and small and medium enterprises, in a context where we are concerned about competitiveness globally for businesses in sustainability, they're concerned about trying to secure resources, create stable environmental, economic environments, these cities in effect hold market power for an enormous, significant percentage of European industry, because up to 80 to 90% of European industry in some way are implicated in transformation of cities. So what we are doing, and actually in partnership with Martin, in partnership with Capital and other organizations in Collaborative for Systemic Climate Action, is to look at how could we convert this initiative into an opportunity to really race ahead in the use of digital infrastructure to enable this. And I don't mean by that individual digital twins that cities are using, which they are doing, to plan and work out how to take scenario planning forward, foresight, and think about value chains and the ways in which they will imagine urban planning over these next 10 years, in particular the 5 years of this period. But instead to use digital infrastructure to model the aggregate effect that those cities represent in terms of market demand, and work with AI and layered agentic AI and layered modeling, pulling in climate risk, pulling in the NDCs that Europe is just getting over the line, and state-determined contributions, so working member state by member state, regions. In many European states, it's the region that has the greatest power of determining climate plans, and the aggregate effect of the European continent, to start to understand what would it look like if we translated this commitment to urban transformation into lead market information, into essentially demand information that industry can engage with, and use that information to structure a series of dialogues and working processes with European industry and small and medium enterprises, pre-competitive, whole value chain, to begin to really put together the puzzle pieces of what in effect will be the largest growth opportunity for European industry since the Second World War, and indeed before. In fact, the comparison that we're using is this is something like the equivalent of the Marshall Plan. It is a multi-sided, complex, massive industrial re-industrialization of Europe, and an opportunity to reconfigure European infrastructure and European value chains. And that is, it is possible, but not in the timeframes that we are talking about, at the scale we're talking about, and the complexity we're talking about, without something like the kind of open digital infrastructure and AI-enabled modeling that we need. Thank you so much, Kristen. And I think, you, myself, and Martin were also in Rio, and for those who by any chance were in Rio, it was really incredible to see both C40, but all of the major city associations and the mayors come together. And what we saw was the capacity at the local level to really transform and to reach some of the speed and scale that we need. But we need to give the tools, and this is what you're talking about. It's putting in place those tools, those frameworks, and I'll pass to Martin and then I'll come back here. So maybe just one reflection. I think that the live place to imagine is that cities that are supported by public funding to go ahead in this way, plan out what they need, and in, say, 2 or 3 years, when they've got it all worked out, turn around to industry and say, so we're ready, this is what we need. And industry at that point says, I had no idea this program existed, I'm certainly not ready to supply at that scale, I can't even manufacture buses, anything else that you need. So try to pull this way upstream and using AI support to co-create what these kinds of markets look like, what these kinds of transitions look like. That's what this is really about.
I agree with you, and I was going to go to Martin, but I wonder if I shouldn't be bringing in actually Dusan. Dusan Connect, who's actually here virtually from Brussels in DG Klima, so that's the Directorate General for Climate in the European Commission. And as we're talking about a program that also has been established by the European Commission as one of our key moonshots, I think it would be lovely to have you come in, Dusan, and also a reflection on the twin transition, because this is also very much what we call the twin transition in European schools. So, Dusan, welcome.
Good afternoon. Greetings from Brussels. Do you hear me?
Yes, we hear you. It's wonderful. Thank you. Please.
Okay. So thanks for having me. It is really inspiring for me to be part of this discussion with such leading voices in digital and local climate action. For us, cities are really extremely important for climate action. They are responsible for more than 70% of global greenhouse gas emissions, but also they suffer already from impacts of climate change, and they have a crucial role in delivering in our collective climate goals. But at the same time, they have really high responsibility. They are asked to do more with less, managing a wide range of responsibilities with limited budgets, time constraints, and also limited capacity. Therefore, the European Commission is fully committed to help cities, to support them, to build capacity, to raise ambition, implement actions, and unlock financing. We have several interconnected initiatives. Kirsten already very well described our Horizon Europe mission on climate neutral and smart cities, but there are several others. I would like to mention Covenant of Mayors. We have it on European level, more than 10,000 cities, and global level, so altogether almost 14,000 cities that are signatories. And this is for us a platform to achieve local climate and energy targets. We have also the European Urban Initiative, which provides funding for innovation, technical assistance, and per learning. Also, we are building Destination F. This is a digital replica of the planet that we are combining their AI with Earth observation data, supercomputing to simulate complex climate and environmental systems. And recently, also, we launched the European Digital Infrastructure Consortium, Cityverse, that is helping cities with local digital twins. This is also building an AI enabled toolbox that helps local digital twins and help cities to design, to train, and monitor climate solutions virtually. All these programs, these much other programs for mobility, energy, environment, they are building ecosystem of digital public infrastructure for climate action, generating knowledge, solutions, real-world success stories that can be replicated and scale up. But we have a huge challenge here. We have hundreds, maybe thousands of good solutions developed locally, piloted in several cities, but they are not scaled up. I would say that we have a sleeping giant of innovative local projects waiting to be awakened, scaled, and connected. And I think that AI and open digital systems can help us a lot. They offer a powerful opportunity to bridge this gap between local innovation and systemic transformation. Therefore, now in DG Klima, we are looking how we can use better AI tools. So we are now looking at the AI for cities initiatives to guide cities along the full journey from ambition to implementation. And we are focusing on 4 components: on discovery and aggregation, climate action plan builder, on financing services, and expert guiding technical assistance. Discovery and navigation, we are looking to AI tool helping cities easily find and replicate successful projects and best practices. Second component, AI tool for climate action builder, is simplifying the process of developing and updating robust local climate plans. So not only for large cities, but really for all cities. And we have to help them with funding, improving the link between action and investment, and also automating elements of financing applications. And the most important part, we need a robust technical assistance service to help cities to use these AI tools, other sources, also global initiatives to build a local capacity with expert knowledge at every stage of the climate action life cycle. And we believe that this broader vision of integrating successful digital tools, data platforms, and financing mechanism into a cohesive open framework would help cities, regardless of their size or capacity, to act with confidence on climate action. And this digital public infrastructure can be a cornerstone for systemic climate action, helping cities to implement their plans faster, share knowledge more freely, and unlock the financing that they need to transform. And we are keen to cooperate to connect emerging systems so that together we can turn fragmented progress into a connected market for regional transition. Thanks a lot.
Possible, then do let us know, okay? Good. So what I wanted to do is now bridge what Kirsten said, what you have indicated, which has been so important. Also in terms of making sure that we have the right digital public infrastructure, that we have the right finance flows, and that we also have the right skills to use the data and that digital infrastructure once we have it. And this is where Martin
to drive action that meets the national plan. And that requires that coordination between communities, cities, provinces and states, countries, and of course, our global context, our carbon budget and our Earth budget. But also a project that has been emerging from the collaborative systemic climate action, also here in Brazil, in Porto Alegre, a key city in the state of Rio Grande do Sul that has suffered the biggest climate impact in the history of Brazil, was 4 meters below water, working with my dear colleague Fernanda on how do we tackle that. So it is very important as digital architects to think about what is the commonality across those three contexts. In the context of Europe, first, AI is a function of intelligence, but also the architecture of information, right? So when we architect information, we have to really learn from what have the cities been putting on their plans to create that, teasing apart all that logic that also makes sense with how industries have been seeing the drive and breaks to supply chains and also finance, right? It's those three critical ingredients need to come together. So what we have and what we're working on is putting together the right AI capability and information logic, taxonomies, and ontology. What's the language that also needs to be interoperable across multiple modules? Cities use tools to come up with their plans, as Dusan said, with their inventories. Industries use their own tools. We have to tease apart what is the commonality so all those tools come together under a common workflow. And what is the underlying knowledge graph that happens as we start pulling all of that information together. This is what I think is one of the key aspects for not just mapping the demand from the cities, but linking to the discussion of industry and finance. Jumping ahead, and there's much we can talk about, right? I do want to hit some points on the context of CHAMP in Brazil. And it speaks a little bit to what Dusan also was saying around discovery. We just put together and launched this week, actually yesterday in the Green Zone, the Brazilian government launched the City Climate Compass. Actually, before I do that, I do want to be aware that Kirsten's leaving us for another panel. This is the multi-solve things that are happening right now. I'm going to pause and see if you want to give us some parting words. Okay. Thank you. We had the challenge to, within a year, compile 5,000, actually 50 cities that are engaged into our program, all their greenhouse gas inventories, all their risk assessments, and identifying the key projects that need to be advanced. We did that with the help of AI, helping agentic work process flows, like discovering the data that's available in Brazil, looking at the data models, and then unifying, harmonizing into the structures of inventory, risk, and projects. Because we did that 2 months ago, the Brazilian government was so excited, and the 50 cities, in collaboration with C40 and GCOM, they said, can we do it for all cities? And I said, by when? By COUGAR. And I'm like, that's in 2 months. And lo and behold, because that work was done, that pre-work, that architecture that I was talking about before, we were able to do that. And so today, yesterday, we launched the City Climate Compass, where it has all of that information for the 5,570 cities. The key challenge ahead is the capacity that those cities have to turn those actions into projects, into finance. So the next step that we're working on, putting together all these AI modules, is to give them more capability so city officials, consultants can rapidly do that, because AI is able to synthesize more context, the context of the city, the context of the stakeholders, the policy, to create and implement the action plans more faster. This is all what's happening in the next 6 months. There's also the Brazilian request that we do that in 6 months, because then we go into election period. So we've got 6 months to put the right AI infrastructure to turn those 300 actions into projects. But that is a lesson in an infrastructure that's also relevant to all the other countries. We just had a chat with Argentina. We have some colleagues from Chile joining us now. It's the same workflow of empowering the local governments to come up with the critical actions to have that dialogue with finance. Leapfrogging then into a specific city, Porto Alegre, I would love maybe for you, Fernanda, maybe for perhaps through Sandine, to read on what is the context when we've been looking at this from multi-city logics. As soon as we go into the key issues of the capacity of the city and the state, we start having to ask different questions, but maybe some similarities that I just highlighted that perhaps that could be a good shift.
Yeah, I think that was really perfect, Martine. And I do want to bring Fernanda in, but I want to hold a couple thoughts and reflections that you brought out. First of all, you and I had a conversation with some of the government officials that have been preparing for this presidency, who have made it very clear that digital public infrastructure is fundamental for Brazil and for the global south. But it also brings us into Europe, because I think we are all struggling right now. And the way in which you have described access to digital infrastructure, the architecture that needs to be, first of all, created by human beings who are thinking about a positive good and a positive outcome, is fundamental. That's point number one. The second point that you've indicated, and also Dusan is indicating, is that we need to think regionally or holistically about where we can actually share and cross-fertilize between different cities so that we can really optimize a broader city system than just think about one city. And that's fundamental, although we need to tailor, which is also very important. And I think the third point, and this is one which really actually enables Europe and other regions who do not want to go down the American tech bro feudalistic rabbit hole. And I'm going to bring this up because I think it's really important that we think about, we are here talking about public infrastructure, whereas in the United States, we're talking about private infrastructure. You have to remember that the United States owns, in particular through the cloud, up to almost 90% of European data. And I don't know what the figures are for Latin America or elsewhere, but it probably is pretty comparable. And this is not publicly owned data. So what we're talking about here is a public infrastructure that we are trying to optimize to enable cities to hold on to their data, to be able to be the architects and navigators of their data, rather than to have it owned by those tech bro feudalists. And I really do think it's important that we mention that. And that is exactly the conversation that we've been having with the Brazilian government, with the presidency, around how important public infrastructure is from a digital perspective, and the way in which they want to collaborate with Europe and with other regions across the globe. Now, let's come back to Brazil.
I just want to make a quick comment. This is why open source is so important. Everything we do is, you can take the code, and if us humans came up with an architecture that you think you do better, please go do it, fork it, improve it. Open source, digital open source is a mechanism of governance. I'm saying it taps into the collective intelligence. What often happens is that we think about business models of intellectual property. The business model is in the market making. Is when we start bringing together, when we create value flow, not in the underlying code. This is what we believe it was stand for. That's just something I wanted to put in.
I think that's absolutely fundamental, and it comes back to the whole idea also of a Marshall Plan, whatever we want to call that plan for any other region. But for the European region, if we're going to talk about a Marshall Plan, we need to be the architects of that plan. Digital sovereignty is a potential part of that plan, as long as it's digital public infrastructure that is open, but also sovereign to different regions so that they feel that they have proper ownership in whatever way necessary. So Fernanda, let's now move into how we bring that to the state and how we bring that even to the more local level. And I think what's been most fascinating in the conversations that we've had is how do you bridge the gap between supply and demand? How do you start to bring in capital flows, ensure that you're bringing in the funding to the right projects?
So I would love to connect a little bit back to that conversation because I think it has to do with that. Because when we think about open source, to me, the peer-to-peer model, what you just said, the way that open source develops itself in terms of technology, I think it's one of the greatest examples of collaboration, right? Because it's open, it's well documented, people go and see what they want. And kind of when we think about the COUGAR project, which is what referring to that I'm gonna try to bring some examples.
Spell out COUGAR so people know what COUGAR is, because
Oh,
it could be
yes.
an old woman trying to get
I'm
into
gonna be,
the
I'm gonna be
It could
very
an
honest.
animal.
I'm gonna be very honest. Well, we are, the top of the lane, so COUGAR, but I need to be honest. I was like reading it back in my mind, so I can remember exactly the correct word. So community-owned urban growth and resilience. So a little bit
I
of
love it. I love it.
It's-
That's our COUGAR, right?
it turns out to be COUGAR, a beautiful acronym. But I think that the idea of this systemic collaborative for climate action was to lend all of these concepts that they have been discussing here. So I am very honored to be in a very high level panel. I am the person on the ground. I'm representing Pixera Global, which is the intermediary organization. We help to build bridges for systemic. We try to solve the complex issues of our time, but always looking from the community side. So this is where I come in. We are talking very high level European perspectives, AI, digital perspectives. So as a collaborative, we're joining our forces, our skills to work together and make sure that we have that element. Because we say we need the acceleration of AI to be with still working.
Just lost this,
Well, we need that. So I'm just going to keep with my idea. We need that acceleration, but at the same time, we're also talking that we are dealing with people and things like trust building, community engagement, to make sure that all these technologies are really well appropriated by the people that are actually going to use it. That takes a little bit longer than we would love for it to be. So this is how we started working. We chose Porto Alegre for Porto Alegre as a city because of some of the climate issues that we've had in the past years, and that we just had a tornado in the south of Brazil. I don't know if you saw, but one city in Paraná was completely destroyed. Things that were unthinkable two years back. So what we are doing in Porto Alegre is mapping out the stakeholders in the several levels. So we are not only looking at municipality level now, we are also looking at state level, right? So we started with COUGAR. It's our experiment. It's a pilot in which we're going to bring all of these elements together and create that framework. Because we're hearing from this mapping locally that there is a gap between the demand and supply. So we've got funds, we've got development bank funds, we've got private funds. We have $2.6 billion until 2027 to be spent on the reconstruction of the state. But what we are hearing from local government, state government, is that there's no projects. There are no projects ready. Yesterday I was in a conversation that it was really interesting. The good perception that they are not, ready. So we need to start working. So we've been also mapping community level projects that have been working towards issues that are actually, for instance, named in the Porto Alegre Climate Action Plan, and they're not connected. So, and they need that. We've been hearing, and maybe Martin, you can bring back the discussion to the discussions we've been having with the Environmental Secretary of Porto Alegre that's responsible for the Climate Action Plan. These connections are not being made, but desperately needed. At the same time, we've been talking to the reconstruction state secretary in Rio Grande do Sul, which tells us that there are open calls for the different municipalities. They have received over 700 applications, and out of those, 68 were kind of ready to be financed. So we're talking here capacity building, we're talking here understanding, listening to the actual needs and how we can help them to build. So in that sense, we've been working with these actors on the ground to build that framework. And I think that maybe now, Martin, you can bring back in the high level discussion. I just wanted to set the stage for this pilot. And I hear that is also that's really aligned what we are hearing from, as you've been telling us when we were speaking before, right? That the national government, national actors, very high level actors are interested in bringing those national models into the state level of, and then we start those conversations.
Yeah, excellent. I think that what we're really talking about here is the mycelia effect, or kind of the multiple governance effect, where we really start to optimize the links between national targets, and we've seen the calls for stronger ambition within the NDCs, using digital as a vehicle and smart technologies as a vehicle to optimize actually meeting those targets, in particular at the community level. But I think what's really interesting, and it's a shame that we've lost Dusan, is that we also need to start to quickly show the speed and scale that's possible at the city level. And why is that? Because we're seeing, and I was just on the show We Don't Have Time, which some of you may know. It's a broadcast company that's been talking about the fact that we just don't freaking have time. And I think the key issue about We Don't Have Time is how can we join the dots fast through being the right type of architect for that digital architecture, and then enable for those multiple joined dots to start to enable us to actually meet the targets that we're trying to meet. So Martine, I don't know if you have further reflections on that, because that's really where I think that this digital infrastructure becomes so important. Because I still continue to have that fear that if we don't shift towards that mentality, the digital infrastructure we're talking about is predominantly basically creating wealth feedback loops for certain shareholders that are just going to pocket the money and could actually care less about climate change or about people. And that's what's been playing out in front of us, in particular in the United States, with those wonderful tech pros, which, by the way, half of them went to my high school, because I grew up in Palo Alto in Silicon Valley, and they all totally followed a different pathway than I did. But anyway, pass it over to you.
No, and it's critical, and thanks Fernanda for bringing that community on the ground perspective that we cannot forget. One of the things that, as we were talking about this, that's so important is so many panels. There's a lot of emphasis of we need data and AI, and I would flip that around. Humans build tools. Data and AI are just ways to build better tools that help us, but we need to design what we need those tools for. We talk about two things. We need to connect the dots across stakeholders that often have latency in their communication, their dialogue. City, industry, finance, community. The city, in case of Porto Alegre, Fernanda's been mapping the community projects, the grassroots projects, the city and the city plans, and the whole reconstruction of the state. It's very easy to have blind spots if you're starting to do that. So connecting that out to the second part. The second part is capacity. Humans in local governments particularly have a very low capacity. This is the biggest issue we have in the sector. And honestly, I don't have great solutions for it, because yes, we can build tools so we have more capacity. So city officials, project developers, community grassroots entrepreneurs can do more with less. That is the first challenge for us, that we're building tools. But we also have to think about the systems. Now, in the development of that capacity, what Fernanda said is that we went into a collaborative of around 5 organizations working into Porto Alegre after the floods, with the vision of developing what we frame as a place-based transition fund, a way to create structured finance for a community-informed city plan, right? So most cities develop their plans, but then they have to figure out how they're going to fund them. And it's both possible because they look at their city budget, they look at their city staff, and they say, well, this is a very ambitious plan with the resources we have. But they need to think in terms of what's the private sector, what is the different finance stakeholders, and what does the local community need and can do. However, one of the most immediate things that has happened as we looked at the $2.6 billion of state funds is, as Fernanda said, from 600 projects, only 38 were deemed viable. Viable by who? Oh, by the funds, by the finance sector, right? Kind of viable, that's what he said. So we have a very short window, 2 years, to deploy $2.6 billion. So we have to build tools that communities can use And we did hear from Yusan saying we need better capacity to build these tools. As a tool maker, it is our challenge to build tools that are so user friendly that we don't need to raise money to bring capacity to the people. There is always a gap there. We need to reduce the gap, right? So it's always a challenge of like, how do we build tools that people can just use straight up? So how do we equip those entrepreneurs on the ground to build tools? How do we do them in a way that can meet all the fund requests? So now we're talking about project finance structuration that is community compatible and development finance compatible. Also within the next 6 months, as I said before, the challenge.
That is a big challenge. I just want to say, maybe you don't know that, but in my past life, I was a user experience designer. So I try to work with the user side to make sure that, you know, maybe the developers here have heard of the book, Don't Make Me Think. So it's the motto, right? When you're going to develop any software or any, you know, application, you know, that's what you have to do the user. Do not make me think. He needs to know where to go. And the thing is, there are several different users, right? So you need to test and test and test before you start developing something. And how you do that? Listening. That's how you start building tools that are going to be appropriate for a certain context, for other contexts. So I just wanted to add that, and this is what we are doing when we are because the way that the local government is going to look is different from the local communities, but we need to make sure that we start connecting those dots. So when we think about those tools, we need to think about the people that are going to use them, but we need to talk to them before we start building.
Thank you for that. I want to bring Dusan back because even though he's not on the screen, he's listening and we can hear him, I think.
Hello.
We'd love to hear your reflections on what you're hearing.
Thanks.
Exactly.
Can I?
Yes.
Okay. Thanks a lot. I'm sorry that I was disconnected for a while, but partly I was listening. And what I would like to highlight that at the end, action is local action. So we need really people on the ground to take what. Sorry, now again. Do you hear me?
You couldn't hear.
Sorry, I will try to say some words. If not, you can disrupt me and to say to finish. But what I wanted to say that really we need people on local level. And I'm glad that mayors are really supporting climate action. Actually, when there was a survey done by EuroCities, mayors, they highlighted climate action as their main priority. So really to adapt to changing climate and to take steps to decarbonize. And we should help them to do it in an easier way. So really also to use digital tools, AI tools to facilitate action on local level. And I see very many really good initiatives, and we should work together to help cities to implement their actions. So really to go through ambition to action and from action to bankable projects. And I think that we have many tools that could be used, and AI could be a facilitator. So I'm looking forward to work with you.
Ambition to action to bankable projects. I think that's really fundamental. And that's really what we've been trying to do actually, is to look how we could do that within a Brazilian context. always taking into consideration also the vision. And I really want to bring the vision back because I think it's very important. We know right now that there is so much competition in terms of the digital revolution that we're forgetting why and for whom and for what. And what we're talking about here is a digital revolution, exactly as you said, Dusan, which is thinking about enabling the lives and livelihoods of people while we stay within the planetary boundaries. And so, maybe a few final thoughts, Martine, as to, because what you are saying is if we become the architects, then we can create the guardrails. And I think the guardrails are fundamental. We're seeing this across the globe. So what for you would be just a quick final recommendation as we move forward in terms of the most urgent guardrail we would need for this to really work?
I think in terms of urgency is trying to structure that architecture in the most open way as possible. When we think about digital public goods, we have to really think about the governance of that infrastructure to trace how data is used because it can be monetized. Those are some of the most immediate, urgent ones. When we look into the future, the age of AI is also moving at a very fast speed, to which we can also say that artificial general intelligence is almost inevitable. It's inevitable because as humans think it's inevitable. So it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Almost every foundational lab on AI is working towards AGI. And so I pose that because AGI is inevitable, I also think that when we have an intelligence that's more powerful than we are, it's very likely that we might lose control of it. So when we lose control of very powerful AGI within the next 10 years or 50 years, we want to make sure that it's designed and really has the broader context in mind. So as we are thinking about the architecture of the large AI models, they have to be designed with spatial and livable context. So they have to really understand the concept of a livable planet, of a Gaia, of structure that we are all nested into. So a lot of our core more edge research is around nested AI. Where we can work on an AI model, but it's inside a bigger AI model, inside a bigger Earth AI. So this is a vision for Earth-centric AI, and we put forward in the lead up to the London Climate Action Week. It's critical that we start having those discussions. They're urgent, but they're also in parallel, right? So I do have to put that forward. We want to have equity. We want to understand the complexity of living systems, which is complex adaptive systems, as a core foundational way of how AI thinks and operates.
Thank you, Martine, and I could not agree more. It's so fundamental as we move forward, as we move in this way. I don't know if there are any questions from the audience, anyone that wants to bring in a reflection, participate in the conversation.
Or publications.
Yes, please. Publications. Is there another? Here.
Well, I have many questions. I think, I think the urban is valuable because, especially you use a lot of digital infrastructure in the urban area, and in this area, I mean, the urban area will get more valuable because we should use a lot of energy, especially the stable energy, to digital infrastructure. So I would like to ask if we want to implement a lot of digital infrastructure in the urban area, how can we reduce the mobility in a city area?
I think that's such a valid question, and it's the one that I struggle with every day. It really is, in particular because I look at what the United States is doing. Can everyone hear me? Yeah. So if we look at the pathway that the United States is taking, is run to backtrack on renewable energy investment. And if you're